Storm Shadow missiles can blitz military targets inside Russia. And in more good news for Ukraine, F-16 jets are on the way and allies have promised more Patriot Air Defence systems. But it comes in the wake of a devastating Russian missile strike on a children's hospital in Kiev. Kharkiv again, and this is the same yet. We're in Kharkiv again. My name is Jerome Starkey. I'm the defence editor at The Sun newspaper, and this is Frontline, your weekly roundup of the most important news from the war in Ukraine. We start with the announcement from Ukraine's President Zelensky that British Storm Shadow cruise missiles, one of the most formidable weapons in Ukraine's arsenal, can be used to hit military targets in Russian territory. Now, Britain has before this said that it would be madness to try and stop Ukraine using weapons that Britain supplies to hit targets on Russian soil. But this is the first time we've had explicit confirmation that the Storm Shadow cruise missiles, these are bunker-busting cruise missiles fired from aircraft, can be used to hit targets inside Russian territory. And that's significant because it creates ambiguity, uncertainty for Moscow on where it should place its air defense systems to try and stop those missiles hitting high-value targets. The rules around using Western weapons against targets in Russia has been a subject of heated discussions, particularly for the Ukrainians and particularly in the wake of that recent Russian offensive into Kharkiv from neighbouring Russian Belgorod province. Britain has for a long time been on the front foot in this area. We know that those Storm Shadow missiles have been used to devastating effect to hit targets, particularly inside occupied Crimea, most notably a warship and a submarine in dry dock and the headquarters of Russia's Black Sea Fleet. President Zelensky, while he's been in Washington, D.C. in America for the 75th anniversary NATO summit, said that he had learned that Ukraine could use these Storm Shadow missiles to hit targets in Russia, and he said he was discussing the practical implications of that when he met Britain's new Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer. In more good news for Ukraine, the United States have said that F-16 jets from Denmark and the Netherlands are on their way as we speak. Those fighter jets are due to be operational, due to be flying this summer, so any day now. Now, this is a subject we've touched on a lot. It's something you've asked a lot of questions about. When are the F-16s going to arrive? It feels now more imminent than ever. And if the past is anything to go by in this conflict, actually, when we hear official announcements that weapons are on their way, it has often meant that those weapons are already there. That is my speculation. I cannot confirm that. We've also heard from the Americans, though, that more F-16s may soon be forthcoming from the Belgians and the Norwegians. And today, Sweden has repeated its offer to send or donate its Gripen fighter jets as well. Now, the Gripens have long been put forward as perhaps the most suitable NATO fighter jet for Ukraine's fight, particularly because they were built to take off and land on roads rather than runways, because the conflict scenario that they were envisaged for, rather designed for, would see the dispersal of Sweden's air force to avoid it being attacked at airfields. And that is obviously a risk that Ukraine faces. They are resilient, hardy aircraft. And in the wake of that devastating Russian missile blitz earlier this week, which hit a children's hospital in Kiev, America has confirmed that there will be at least 3 new Patriot Air Defence batteries on their way to Ukraine. Those batteries are coming from Germany and Romania, but also the Netherlands is going to donate components to get a 4th Patriot system up and running as well. And that will bolster the Patriot Air Defence systems that are already there. And of course, just to be clear, these are the systems that can shoot down Russia's most sophisticated missiles. The Patriots have shot down the Kinzhal hypersonic missiles, which President Vladimir Putin said were unstoppable. We've also heard from the NATO summit that there will be dozens of other tactical air defence systems soon on their way to Ukraine. These include Gepard systems, NASAM systems, and Iris-T air defence systems. So all good news for Ukraine. Kiev will, of course, want everything to arrive as soon as possible. And one of the messages from Britain's new Defence Secretary, John Healey, when he visited Odessa soon after the Labour Party won the election in Britain, soon after he was appointed to that post, his message was that he would be accelerating the pace of donations from the United Kingdom. We will just talk about that airstrike earlier this week that hit the Ohmadit Children's Hospital in Kiev, the main children's hospital in Kiev, because news just in today that one of the children who was being treated there during that strike has sadly died. We saw heartbreaking footage of wounded, bloodied children covered in dust being brought out of the rubble of that hospital. Sick cancer patients, children undergoing chemotherapy, wheeled out in their wheelchairs, many with drips still in their arms, as the building was evacuated. At least 2 adults were killed when that hospital suffered a direct strike. Dozens were injured, and of course, many more people killed and injured across Ukraine, because the strike that hit Kiev was not the only target. More than 40 missiles, President Zelensky said, hit targets right across Ukraine. And what was unusual about that particular bombardment was that it happened in broad daylight. And the suggestion from people I've spoken to in Ukraine is they feel that this is designed to cause maximum terror, to cause maximum carnage, because for much of this conflict, those big missile strikes have happened at night, and that is when many buildings, be they warehouses or military targets, might be less populated, fewer people there. But hitting these targets during daytime almost guarantees that there are going to be more casualties. And when the target is a hospital, it guarantees civilian casualties. Zelensky said it was important for the world to see what's going on. His top advisor, Andriy Yermak, described it as a genocidal attack. The United Nations representative for Ukraine called it unconscionable that a children's hospital should be targeted and that children should be hit. A salient and really powerful reminder of exactly what is at stake, what is happening in this conflict, because it's easy for us occasionally to forget the realities of the day-to-day misery that this war is inflicting. And in terms of what's happening on the battlefield, the short answer, not an awful lot, but there has been intensive fighting since our last update around the town of Chaziv Yar. Chaziv Yar sits just to the west of Bakhmut. Remember, Bakhmut was for many months the focus of Russia's furious meat grinder assaults. Russia has captured Bakhmut, the high ground, the town that sits on the high ground just to the west of it, Chaziv Yar. I was there, about 18 months ago, and even then it felt like a ghost town. Now, by all accounts, it remains an eerily awful place. Many of the buildings that I would have seen have since been reduced to rubble. Ukrainian forces, in the most recent development, we think, have retaken some of the positions that they were forced to vacate. Broadly speaking, as before, the front lines are not moving very much. Where they are, it appears to be Russian forces grinding slowly forward. If you're watching this on YouTube and you do have any questions, please do ask them in the comments below. Fantastic response last time round, nearly 2,000 comments and questions. Thank you very much. I'll do my best to answer some of them. Now, a lot of questions about F-16s. When are they going to arrive? Well, we've answered that. They might already be there. Certainly, they're on their way. Could the F-16s be based in neighbouring countries? Of course, that would be to protect them, to try and protect them from Russian missile strikes. It's a good question. There have been suggestions, I've read suggestions, that that is perhaps what's going to happen. There is concern that if F-16s were based in neighbouring countries, though, and were to take off and conduct kinetic strikes against Russian targets, that would be seen as an escalation. There remains this residual concern among Ukraine's allies about this conflict spiralling out of control. But at the same time, a message from many of Ukraine's supporters is that they cannot be deterred by Russian threats and saber-rattling. So it remains to be seen exactly where these F-16s will be based. That may remain a secret for obvious reasons. The prospect of keeping them inside Ukraine and outside Ukraine certainly being given serious thought. Another question, will the North Koreans make any significant difference to Russia's war effort? Last week we talked about the fact that Pyongyang had pledged to send a brigade of combat engineers to boost the Russian war effort. It's unlikely in real terms that this would make any real difference. Russia has a huge number of soldiers already involved, and the North Korean troops are not expected on the front lines. It's more symbolic. It's a sign that North Korea is committing to support Russia. And in fact, the way North Korea might make a real difference and is trying to make a real difference is through the supply of large amounts of dumb munitions, artillery shells, to keep the Russian howitzers on the front line firing. While we're on the subject of North Korea, worth noting that Chinese troops have been taking part in drills, in war games in Belarus, Ukraine's northern neighbour. Just a reminder there of the axis of powers, China, Russia, North Korea, who are lining up against the Western-led alliance to support Ukraine. And of course, all of that fueling the fears of possible global conflict. I described last week how countries were being sucked into the war in Ukraine. A number of you asked, well, isn't that therefore already a world war? I think there's a subtle difference. The world wars, certainly World War II, was fought by many countries on many territory. What is happening in Ukraine is ostensibly Ukraine and its allies and Russia and its allies fighting on a single territory, or rather on the two territories of Ukraine and Russia. Curious question about whether the British Dragonfire laser could be a game changer. Could it shoot down Russian hypersonic missiles? It's a really interesting question. The Dragonfire laser is a cutting-edge new British technology that has been proven to be able to shoot down drones. It fires an incredibly powerful and accurate laser beam at targets. It has not been deployed operationally. It's still in the development phase, so too early at this stage to say whether it will be useful shooting down anything in the conflict in Ukraine, let alone those hypersonic missiles. And the final question, is Ukraine losing? I think it's a really important question because ultimately the situation in Ukraine is not good for the Ukrainians. And indeed, I spoke to a former chief of Britain's general staff, a former head of the British Army, who said very clearly, right now, Ukraine is losing. It's losing slowly, but it's losing because Russia has more men and more munitions to throw into this fight, and Russia can grind forward and forward. But that does not mean the outcome of this conflict is a foregone conclusion, because it remains to be seen how long Russia can sustain that effort, and much of Ukraine's counteroffensive or rather sort of ongoing resistance is focused on trying to break Russia's will and, crucially, its ability to fight. As ever, if you have any questions, please do ask them in the comments below, and we'll endeavour to answer as many of them as we can next week. And I'll also get into the comments myself. If there's some I can't answer on the video, then I'll answer them in the comments below instead.